Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Good to see everybody here this morning. Happy Mother's Day to the mothers and to us guys. We don't get to do that, so. Society might say that we do, but we don't. Anyway. All right, so it is good to see everybody here this morning. So, just the last thing we were talking about last week was back on question 7. We were talking about, remember we're in James chapter 4, and we were talking about submitting to God, resisting the devil, drawing near to God, purifying our hearts, and lamenting or repenting for our sins, and there was the note also of let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. You know, does that laughter imply that we're enjoying the things of the world and not of God? And then humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and He will lift you up. So that was the last thing we were looking at. I want to read verses 11 through 17 again before we get into these questions. Do not speak evil of one another, brethren. He who speaks evil of a brother and judges his brother speaks evil of the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is one lawgiver who is able to save and to destroy. Who are you to judge another? Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell, and make a profit, whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow. For what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that. But now you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. Therefore, to him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin. So for question number 8, why should one not speak evil of a brother or a sister or a fellow Christian, however you want to say that? Well, he says when we do that, what does he say?
We speak against the law, we judge our brother and not a doer of the law, but we're a judge of the law.
Right, when we speak evil, then we're judging the law. We're not being a doer of the law, but a judge. So we become a judge when we do that. And, you know, he mentions, well, we're going to get into that in the next question. So let's move down to question 9 here. What other reasons does James give for not judging one another?
It's not up to us to judge. We have a judge.
We have a judge. He says there is one lawgiver. There is one judge. It's the Lord. It's not us. So it's not up to us to judge. We can't really know a person's heart anyway, not the way the Lord does. And there's no way that we can't tell, or that we can tell someone's not going to turn around in the next minute and come to God. We don't know that. There's no way for us to know. So there's no point in us judging anyone, even if they're not even a Christian. Or we don't know if someone is a Christian, if they're having problems and doing something wrong, that they won't repent and turn around. We should actually be there to help them do that, right? So, would our judgment really matter anyway?
No, the final judgment is God.
Right. I mean, even if I judge somebody, is that even going to have an effect?
No.
I mean, we just don't have that power, right? It's not going to make any difference.
I think the only time maybe we need to judge is like a Christian's gone on the wayside and we need to bring them back.
Right. That's a different type of thing where we're judging like their actions and we're saying, hey, you know, we know to steal or whatever they're doing, whatever it might be, is wrong. And we would talk to them about that, right? Did you have something, Matt?
Yeah, it seems like the problem here is that the person who's setting himself up to judge is sort of putting himself lording themselves over and making themselves in charge when they're not, and just being a bossy.
Yeah.
And they don't have any right to do. We're all brothers and sisters. We're not, supreme commanders, so and so, and everybody else. We're all in this together.
Yes, when we're judging, we're putting ourselves up as the judge, as a boss, or as someone who's actually in control, kind of trying to take the Lord's place, right? We're trying to put ourselves in his spot and say that we can judge. Yes?
It makes me think of earlier when we talked about looking in the mirror, that we're supposed to judge ourselves.
Oh, yes. Now, yes, we should judge ourselves. We should always be examining ourselves, right? I mean, that's a big part of Christianity, is that we should be judging ourselves and examining ourselves. Did anyone else have something on this? Yes.
We mentioned about helping another. That's not judgment. That is, if we follow the example that we're given in Galatians chapter 6, and the first 4 verses there take care of that situation. It said, brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. Bear one another's burden, and so fulfill the law of Christ. Or if anyone thinks himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. But let each examine his own work, and then he will have rejoicing in himself alone and not in another. So we're supposed to help that individual, not.
Right. We're supposed to help that individual that's caught in trespasses or has strayed and is, doing right. Right. We're supposed to help them in the spirit of love and gentleness. Right.
That's our way of expressing love.
Right. That we bring them back through love, not through judgment and condemnation. Did anybody else have anything? All right. So if we look down at question number 10, because James kind of switches gears here in a way. I think the ideas kind of flow together, but he says, why should we be careful about the plans we make?
Well, for one thing, we don't know what tomorrow brings.
Right.
Plans may be true.
We don't know what tomorrow brings, right?
And we need to look to God for our future.
Look to God for our future, yeah.
And make our own plan and leave God out.
We need to, it's kind of like we see with the difference between Saul and David. We need to look to God for what's in the future, and we need to understand that we don't know the future and what controls that or what's going to happen there. Yes, Matt.
Arguably, this continues that theme that we were just talking about of humility,
Yeah.
not being
Right.
putting ourselves in the place of God, right? That we don't know what's really going to happen, and if we just presumptuously say, "Well, I'm going to do this and this and this, and it's going to happen,"
Mm-hmm.
well, let there be light. We can't say that. That's God can control that stuff.
Right. And that is part of that theme of, like you said, of humility, of not putting ourselves in a place that we're not in, not raising ourselves up in arrogance. I think it's why he mentions arrogance, that we need to realize that we don't know that future. We don't know what's going to bring, what the next minute is going to bring, really. We just, So it is about, that is largely, I guess, about humility. So he says our life is but a vapor as well, right? That we're only here for a short time. So, and it reminds us of the shortness, how brief our life can be. And we really don't know when our life is going to end. Each one of us. We just don't know. So question number 11, with what qualification can one make plans for the future?
If the Lord wills.
If the Lord wills, right? I mean, that just means we're acknowledging God and we're saying, admitting we don't know the future, and we're just admitting that if the Lord wills, if Jesus doesn't come back in the next few minutes, then we'll we'll continue on and do whatever. Right? Does anyone? Yes.
Sometimes I find myself making a statement about my plans that way.
Mm-hmm.
And if I remember, then I put at the end, Lord willing.
Yes.
I might forget to put it at the beginning.
Yeah, sometimes I know we talk about things all the time, and I don't always say if the Lord wills or Lord willing either. But I think in our hearts, if we acknowledge and know that that's the case, we may not always say that every time, but it's not a bad habit. It's a great habit to be in. Yes.
I don't think it's something we have to say. It's a frame of mind. It's something we have to know that God has to be. God's will has to be done.
Right.
And we're following that, even though we don't always say it. But we know that it's God's will.
Right. It's a frame of mind. It's what's in our heart. Yes.
Well, doesn't Christ in one of his prayers say, not my will, but thy will be done?
Yeah.
Well, yes, Jesus does say that. I mean,
He was God's son, and he even respected the Father in that way.
and he knew, at least at that point, he knew what the future was, right? So, I mean, for him, he knew what the future was. So.
And he knew God wasn't going to change his mind, but still at the same time, he had to ask.
That was that human part of him,
Yeah.
I believe, that had to ask that.
I think so too.
So,
Forget it.
Yes.
I'm from West Virginia, so it was a saying that you heard it a lot. If the Lord willing and the creek don't rise.
oh, yes, yeah, that is.
I had to add that. I'm sorry.
No, we used to hear that a lot, too, when I was growing up in Wilkes County, yeah. That's not an unusual statement in the rural areas of the country, I'll say. That's probably not. Yes.
And if you think about that, that's really just an example of the Lord willing. I mean, he's controlling the weather and everything else. And so
Yep.
that's just one example of where he can change our plans.
Right. That's an example of God being in control. That's right. And things can change. And it will change because that's the way it's supposed to be, whether we are prepared or not. So we should try to be prepared, right? So question 12, of what is one guilty when plans are made without considering the Lord's will?
You're leaving God out of your life.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's true. You're leaving God out. You're not accepting his direction, I guess. You're not being humble, right? Yeah, you're leaving God out, kind of like Saul would go and do whatever and, not check with God or ask God. Yes.
I was going to say, when we have confidence in something, it almost gives us license to boast about it, but we're not supposed to. But
Right.
we know that confidence comes from God.
Right. Our confidence should be in God and in his will and his plans so that, it's not in ourselves and in our will and our plans. Pardon me. I can have plans and make plans, but I know that my plans, really, no matter what I plan, if I plan something even in the next 2 days, it could change. The weather could change. Our lot might not get done. I mean, it's not supposed to. We check the weather, but nonetheless, that's just the way it is. So, yes.
In my ladies' class last Friday, I had the ladies over and we talked about the 3 trees, and I won't go into the whole story, but each one of the trees had an idea what they wanted to be when they were cut down. And they were
All right.
disappointed because of what they turned out to be until they heard the Lord say, well, let me show you this. And then they realized that his way was a better way than their way.
They were used for other purposes. Yeah. And sometimes we are used for God's purposes if we'll allow him, even if it's not our purpose. That's true. That can happen. So we don't want to be too trusting in our own plans and in our own. We don't want to be arrogant. This still relates back to that idea of putting ourselves up. We're arrogant and we are putting ourselves in the Lord's place like we know what's going to happen. So it's still all in that same theme. So if we look at 13, question 13, of what is one guilty if they know what is good but fail to do it? Very simple answer, right?
The letter word, sin.
Right.
The letter I is right in the middle.
Okay, yeah, the letter I is right in the middle. Sin. So we're guilty of sin if we know what is good or what we should do and we don't do it. Yes.
On a physical plane of that is a father knows that he's to take care of his children and clothe them and feed them and house them. He knows that, but if he fails to do it, he's sinning. And we have a lot of fathers in the world doing this right now. And on a spiritual sense, we know what the rest of the story is.
Right. We do have. I'm sure we're all guilty of not doing what is good at some point in our lives. But yeah, we do have a lot of things going on in the world where people know what is right to do, what they should be doing, and they're not. But yes, Matt.
My mind went back to James 2:16 where we talked about that, where the person says, "Go in peace, be warmed and filled," and then they
Yes.
don't really do anything. So clearly, by saying that, you know that they need to be warm, you know that they're hungry, but you don't do it. We
Yes.
want to do good, but we don't do it.
That reminds me of that too. It takes you back to James earlier saying, we can't just tell people, be warm and be filled, but you need to actually do something good to help those people, to help someone. And it could also apply to your family and helping and making sure that your family have food and water and everything, just basic good things that we should be doing.
And then, Christ gives an example that when he tells some positive things about people, what they've done, he turns around and says, when you've done that, you've done it to me. So that's a positive thing.
Right, because Jesus said that what we do for others, really, that we're doing that for Him. If you remember, I may not remember exactly where that's located, but he's talking about the sheep and the goats, and the sheep have actually done good things for others, and he says that's what they've done for me. So I remember the story, even if I don't remember the exact location of it. So, and that's a very good example of knowing what's good to do and doing it. And the goats, of course, they failed to do that. And the goats did not go with the Lord. So we want to look at chapter 5 next. Does anybody have anything else on that? I was kind of just moving us along. So we look at chapter 5. Let's see. So basically, I'm going to kind of skim over this here. The summary, this opens with a condemnation toward the rich, at least some of who were oppressing the poor and living in luxury and indulging themselves. And then the last half of the chapter provides a call to prayer and praise. And in general, I think just let me go down here and look, because I think in general we're just trying to they phrased it better than what's in my head right now. So like the first half of the chapter, if we look at the main points of this chapter, the first half of the chapter is about religion, true religion, or just us displaying patience under oppression. And then the second half of the chapter is more about us being blessed through prayer, singing, and having concern for the erring. So I want to start off by reading James chapter 5, verses 1 through 12. And then we'll get into our questions. Come now, you rich, weep and howl for your miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches are corrupted, or some might say have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver are corroded, and their corrosion will be a witness against you and will eat your flesh like fire. You have heaped up treasure in the last days. Indeed, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, cry out, and the cries of the reapers have reached the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. Think of that as Lord of Hosts, and that's the best pronunciation of that word I'm going to do. You have lived on the earth in pleasure and luxury. You have fattened your hearts as in a day of slaughter. You have condemned. You have murdered the just. He does not resist you. Therefore, be patient, brethren, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, waiting patiently for it until it receives the early and latter rain. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Do not grumble against one another, brethren, lest you be condemned. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. My brethren, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord as an example of suffering and patience. Indeed, we count them blessed who endure. You have heard of the perseverance of Job and seen the end intended by the Lord, that the Lord is very compassionate and merciful. But above all, my brethren, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or with any other oath, but let your yes be yes and your no, no, lest you fall into judgment, and some say hypocrisy there for judgment. I like to look at different translations, so if that helps you to understand it more, hopefully that's a good thing. If we look at question 2, so who's being condemned in the first 6 verses of this chapter? The rich, right? Now, there's a note about probably unbelieving rich folks who were oppressing other Christians there, or oppressing Christians. If you look back at James chapter 2, verses 6 and 7, there's probably a relation to that. But notice that, let's see, so it seems to be some particular rich folks that he's referring to. So then if we look at question number 3, what sort of miseries were to come upon them? He lists out some things. Their riches are corrupted. Their gold and silver will be corroded and serve as a witness against them. Now, where it says corrosion, let me go back to that verse for a second. Where it says corrosion, there is another translation that says that could equal or be like a poison, because it says your gold and silver are corroded, but then it says, and their corrosion will be a witness against you and will eat your flesh like fire. And that could be poison. It's like the poison of that greed or that corruption. And I'm looking at it thinking of that corruption as being like a greedy nature, or a strong desire for wealth and money above, the Lord, and valuing that more than God and others. So, yes, ma'am.
I also kind of get the sense, we don't normally think of money as rusty or whatever, but
right.
The sense in which you're just hoarding this stuff up, and it's just sitting there, and it's just wearing out and, rusting and corroding.
Right.
Because you are helping it. You could bless people, and you're just hoarding it up, and it's just, look, it's just sitting there, and that rust, the fact that it's sitting there rusted, shows that you didn't do anything.
Right. So they're sitting there, they're hoarding up their gold and their silver, and he's stating it being corroded or rusted, and it's just rusting away and wasting away. Like, did you have something, Jane?
To me, I get the picture of this as an outside picture of the internal, how these people internally are as well. Their spiritual nature is rusted and corroded, and this is like an outside look at what
Yes.
the inner person is.
Right. Spiritually, they're corrupted and corroded and right. Yes. Because they value that gold and that silver. Yes.
On a positive note, we're supposed to look at the scripture that says, lay up not your treasures in heaven, but, go to the spiritual part.
Right.
These things are eternal.
We should be after spiritual treasure, not after treasure on this world or in this world. It's not that there's necessarily anything wrong if you are rich. It's how you treat those riches, or how you maybe even how you become rich and how you treat others after you get it. Yes.
I was thinking of the rich young ruler that had torn his barns down because he had so much. He needed to store what he had in another barn. So he tore that barn and built a bigger barn. But as Christians, we look at that and think, how selfish is he? Why isn't he sharing what he has with others instead of doing that?
Right. And that's the point of that, is that here he's so rich, he has this abundance of stuff. He's already got enough stored up to do himself. And then he has an even more plentiful harvest again. And then he tears down his old barns and puts up new, bigger ones and just keeps hoarding up more and more. And if you think of that really from a grain idea, then that would probably rot before he would use it all and it would go to waste. I mean, because you can't keep grain forever. So, but yeah.
I think it also, it refers to how they got rich. And those first passages, that like they were cheating their workers.
Yeah.
Pocketing with he kind of refers to that.
Yes, because we do mention that. That's a good lead in.
If you got your riches by actually working and gaining and investing or whatever, but if you got it by cheating others, if that was what was wrong back in Jesus, when they was talking about the tax collectors and all, they were pocketing above what they were supposed to be getting. So
right,
they got the riches by ill-gained means.
So how you get the riches, how you make the money is important too. If you're like the tax collectors, if you're charging too much money, if some of the soldiers were known to be kind of in the protection racket, how we see they portray the mob in some of the movies and stuff, like they come by and say, well, you need to pay us some insurance money or we're going to give you a problem. So kind of that type of thing going on, being threatening. But in this case, these people, we're going to get into this with question number 4. Why is God angry at these rich people? Part of the reason was, like Judy mentioned there, they had defrauded their workers, right? They had kept back some of what they owed them. Yes.
Kind of interesting what he says there in verse 4 about he defrauded the workers, and it's crying out against it. Kind of makes you think of the blood of righteous Abel, right? His blood cries out from the ground, kind of thing. And then it goes on to say, and it's reached the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth, or hosts, or armies. It's sort of an implicit threat, like God is in charge and he has armies and angels and destruction, and you're doing stupid bad things, and he's gonna get you. So
yes.
Like, you are not going to go unpunished for this evil wickedness you're doing upon your neighbor. And then it even goes on to talk about verse 5. You've lived in the earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You fattened yourself. I mean, that's just plucking that imagery out of the prophets, where the people of Israel were living in decadence and luxury, but not following God. And of course, they brought the armies, the Babylonian captivity, and all that stuff upon them.
Yeah. That's a real good point in verse 4, where they're crying out, and the cries of these people who have been cheated basically are reaching the ears of the Lord of hosts, or armies, because that's what the hosts are. It's like the Lord of armies. So that is kind of a threatening, thing. That if you look back at the old rulers, If you got into trouble and it went up to the king, you would be scared for your life. If you were doing something wrong that was against the king's law, you would be very much afraid for your life, because the king could have you executed very easily with no trouble. Even David, that one guy who thought he was going to find favor with David, and of course we know he did not find favor with David. He was executed. I mean, that's just how things were back then. Quickly and easily executed for doing the wrong things. As a part of this question too, let's see, and you mentioned that they lived in pleasure and luxury and in self-indulgences, fattening their hearts. And it also mentions they have heaped up the treasure, of course, in the last days. They have condemned and murdered the just who do not resist them. If we read on down into, is that verse 6? You condemned, you have murdered the just, he does not resist you. So the rich people in this case that he's referring to, they have done those things. They have mistreated the innocent as well. So now we get into a little bit of a different question. What are we as Christians to do in response to such oppression?
We're not supposed to lash out. We're supposed to be patient.
Right, we're supposed to be patient, right?
Not complain.
Well, it says, yep, don't grumble against one another. For the judge is at the door, right? And we know who the judge is, and you realize there's that implication of punishment. You know, when you go see the judge, you may get a judgment in your favor, but if you're doing wrong, you're more likely to get a judgment that's not in your favor, and that's going to be bad. Yes?
And Christ is our example, because that's what he did. He never complained. He had patience. He suffered many things, but he never complained.
Right. There's two good examples of trials. One is Jesus. That's an example of being on trial for something you didn't do. The only difference there with the Lord is that he knew what he was doing, and he knew that he wasn't going to be let free or be absolved in any way. And he provides that example of accepting what he had to do, right? Even though it was terribly wrong. If you look at the trial of Paul in Acts, you'll see that he defended himself, whereas Jesus offered really no defense, knowing what was coming and knowing what was going to go on. And he did that for us. Paul defended himself appropriately and correctly within the law, did everything like he should have done. Now, even though we know in the end, from what I understand, he lost and was beheaded, but he did defend himself appropriately as a Roman citizen and did what was correct. So we have two very good examples of how to handle these things. It's just I feel like Paul's example may pertain more to us than the Lord's, because the Lord is a very special case, but that's just, it's the way I read those trials and understand those. So, all right, so let's see. So we talked about being patient. It says, establish their hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. If you think about that, we're to live every day. We don't know. The Lord could be back any minute, so we should be living every day all the time like he's going to be right here, right now. He could appear in the sky. Everybody will know. And then, do not swear or make rash oaths, right? Make sure that we're being honest and letting our yes be yes and our no be no. Because we don't need to swear on anything else. We don't have that kind of power. You can also take that kind of back to what we were talking about earlier, where we're not in the Lord's place. So We can't swear by the earth or anything else.
Rick,
Yes.
it kind of makes it seem like if you have to swear to make sure that you're telling the truth, then it's like the presupposition is that, well, most of the time you're just lying.
Oh.
And that should not be what we're about. We should just say the truth. Yeah.
That's a good point, that if you have to swear that you're telling the truth by something, then it kind of implies that you're lying the rest of the time, which we shouldn't be. We should always be honest, and that's true. Now, however, I have taken oaths like in the military and things like that, and if you go to court, they're probably going to ask you to take an oath, and I don't necessarily see that is what this is referring to, at least not. I don't see anything wrong with those oaths, I guess is what I'm getting at.
That's a problem I always had, because I've been on jury duty. I don't know, they just like the name Ford, evidently. But they used to call me every time you turn around. But, you know, when you're made to raise your hand and swear, you're never sure what, compared to what the Bible says. So I go along with what the judge asked, because it doesn't seem like it's compared to the same thing. Am I getting my wording right?
I think so. I mean, as long as they're just asking you to be honest, I guess, is what I was thinking.
You know, that doesn't.
That seems okay, right? Because that's what those are. They're just asking us to be honest. And like in the military, they're just asking us to be honest always and to carry out our duties correctly and follow orders. Yeah, Matt?
I've not been in court like that, but I've heard that they'll sometimes say, do you swear or affirm such and such?
They do that.
And they'll say that specifically because some people are really hung up on this. I can't ever swear because this says this, right?
Right.
So, but I can affirm. Yes, I'm telling the truth. Yes.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it. If that troubles you, you can affirm, yes, I am telling the truth. You don't have to swear, and you don't have to swear on the Bible, even though that used to be just a standard practice, but you don't have to do that. You can affirm that you're telling the truth. That's true. So that's a good thing. So I think we're at the end of our time for this morning. I want to thank you all for your attention and your interaction. I do want to make note, I set out some light blue books in the back. Those are for, because I figure next time we're going to finish chapter 5 probably. Maybe, maybe not. But anyway, that's 1 Peter. That's those light blue books in the back are 1 Peter, and that's going to be what we're going to start after we finish James. Okay? All right. Thank you.